So imagine for a second that someone hands you this beautifully wrapped, completely sealed box.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. And the only thing you actually know about what is inside this box is just a single word printed on the label on the outside.
Just one word.
Just one word. And that one label totally dictates your reaction. I mean, it dictates how carefully you hold the box, where you decide to put it down in your house, and honestly, how much value you assign to it before you even try to open it.
Well, yeah, because if the label says, like, fragile glass, your posture physically changes. You handle it super carefully.
Exactly. But if that same label says scrap metal, you might just toss it into the trunk of your car without a second thought.
No.
You project this entire set of expectations onto the object purely based on that one identifying mark.
You're basically creating a reality for that object before you even know its true nature. I mean, the label sets the parameters for literally every interaction that follows.
It really does. So now take that exact same concept, but imagine that the box is a human being.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And that label is their name.
Right.
Today, we're jumping into a deep dive on a really fascinating document. It's a set of notes and excerpts titled The Psychology of the Sirah, and it basically explores the prophetic biography, but from a psychological perspective.
Which is such an interesting angle to take.
It really is. And just to be clear right up front for everyone listening, our goal today isn't theological. We're treating this as a historical and, well, a psychological case study. We're strictly analyzing the sociological arguments that are presented in these specific notes.
Right, we're sticking to the source material.
Exactly. Our mission today is to explore how the very first label a person ever receives in their life, their name, can just profoundly shape their psychology, like how it dictates the expectations of their community and even how it can alter the course of deeply entrenched societal traditions. It is, and we're looking at all of this through the specific historical lens of the birth and the naming of Prophet Muhammad. Which, honestly, when you realize that something as basic as a name carries this invisible psychological weight, a weight that dictates our self-confidence before we can even speak, it's just mind-blowing.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And the sources provided actually give us this remarkably detailed historical framework to examine the phenomenon. But to really grasp the psychological weight of what happened, we first have to, establish the stakes of the historical stage.
Right, we need to set the scene.
Exactly. So we're traveling back to Mecca in the year 569 CE.
Okay, 569 CE. And the notes point out that the circumstances around this birth were uniquely perilous, right?
Very perilous. The prophet's father, Abdullah, actually passed away in Medina while returning from a trading journey. And this was before his son was even born.
Wow, so he was an orphan before birth.
Yes, and in the context of 6th century Mecca, that isn't just a personal tragedy. It is a severe socioeconomic crisis.
Because of how the society was structured.
Exactly. Mecca was this harsh, unforgiving environment, both geographically and socially. The overarching power structure was dominated by the Quraysh tribe. They were the ultimate gatekeepers of the city.
Right, they controlled all the trade, they controlled the Kaaba.
All of it. And in this society, the patriarchal figure, the father, was the absolute center of a child's social standing. It was about physical protection, economic future. Tribal loyalty and lineage were honestly the only real social safety nets that existed.
So without a father, a child was just completely exposed.
Effectively born into a position of extreme vulnerability. So the monumental responsibility of protecting him shifted entirely to his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib.
And the text describes Abdul Muttalib as one of the most prominent leaders of the Quraysh. Like, he was this highly respected figure, totally steeped in tribal authority.
Yeah, he had a lot of influence.
And the notes include this really specific, vivid detail that I loved. It says he was famous for feeding the birds.
Right, which paints such an interesting picture.
It does. It's like, here is a man who wielded immense political power, but he also possessed this expansive sense of care for the vulnerable. So 7 days after his grandson's birth, Abdul Muttalib throws a feast, which the notes say was pretty standard practice.
Totally normal for the time.
But the announcement he makes at that feast is completely unorthodox.
Oh, completely. He announces the name to his friends and to the tribal leadership. He says the name is Muhammad, which translates to the praised one. And the reaction from the Meccan elite was just sheer shock.
Why were they so shocked?
Because in the Quraysh tribe, naming conventions were rigid. I mean, very rigid. You used a traditional ancestor's name, lineage was currency. Honoring the past was basically how you signaled your allegiance to the tribe.
So bucking that tradition wasn't just like a minor faux pas.
No, not at all. It was seen as a deliberate disruption of the social order.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I need to push back on this a little bit. If lineage is their only real currency, right? And this child is already an orphan lacking a father's protection, why on earth would the grandfather abandon the ancestral naming tradition?
It seems counterintuitive.
Right. Wouldn't breaking the rules just alienate the very tribe that this extremely vulnerable kid needs to survive? I mean, it's like a modern family where everyone expects the new baby to be named Junior or to carry on this big legacy family name. And then the grandfather just completely bucks the trend for the sake of some higher purpose. It seems like an incredibly reckless gamble.
It definitely looks reckless if you view protection purely through the lens of conformity. But Abdul-Muttalib was playing a completely different game here.
How so?
Well, when his peers inevitably pressed him on why he rejected an ancestral name, his explanation was actually deeply strategic. He said, "I wanted Allah in the heavens and people on earth to praise him."
Wow. That's a huge statement.
It is. He recognized that the child lacked the standard armor of a father's presence. So instead of trying to hide the boy behind a dead father's legacy or some generic tribal moniker, he gave him a name that demanded respect on its own merit.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, he was actively deciding not to anchor the child to the past, but to launch him toward a highly specific, positive future.
That's brilliant, actually. But Abdul-Muttalib's intention wouldn't really matter if human brains weren't deeply wired to respond to repetition.
Right, exactly.
To understand why his gamble actually worked, the sources tell us we have to look at what hearing a specific word thousands of times before age 5 actually does to a developing ego.
Like the daily mechanics of it.
Yeah. The sources pivot here from the historical surprise in Mecca to the daily mechanical reality of having a name. I mean, a name is the very first label a person ever hears, and it remains the most frequently repeated label for the rest of their entire life.
Think about it. Before a child even fully understands what a noun or a verb is, they recognize the sound complex that refers to them.
It's just a sound at first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it becomes the absolute core of identity formation. The notes explicitly state that names with positive associations serve as a psychological baseline.
A baseline for what?
For everything. They naturally strengthen a person's self-confidence, their self-love, self-acceptance, and even their social comfort.
Which makes sense, but the inverse is also true, and honestly, the consequences outlined in the text for that are tough to read.
Yeah, it's rough.
It says that names that are mocked or even just difficult to pronounce or carry heavy negative associations, they lead to introversion. They lead to defensiveness and social anxiety. And this is especially damaging during those really vulnerable years of childhood and adolescence.
It is.
It kind of makes me think having a difficult or constantly mocked name is kind of like being forced to wear a heavy, scratchy wool sweater every single day.
Oh, that is a great way to put it. The psychological term for that scratchy sweater is cognitive load.
Cognitive load.
Yeah. A child with a heavily burdened name is forced to spend valuable mental energy just managing other people's reactions, rather than just being present and learning.
Right. They're always on guard.
Every time they meet a new person, the brain has to brace for friction. Like, are they going to mispronounce it? Are they going to make that exact same joke I've heard 100 times? Will I have to explain its origin again?
And that constant low-level defensiveness actually shapes a personality over time.
It absolutely does.
By contrast, a positive, meaningful name is like a perfectly tailored jacket, you know? You put it on and you just feel instantly at ease in a room.
You don't have to explain yourself.
Exactly. The fit is natural and it just makes you feel secure. But again, I find myself wondering about the limits of this. Like, can a tailored jacket of a name really overcome the material reality of being a fatherless child in a ruthless society like 6th century Mecca?
It sounds like a stretch, right?
It does. It almost sounds like we are attributing magical properties to a word.
Well, it isn't magic. It is behavioral programming.
Okay, explain that.
The name doesn't replace the father, obviously, but it builds internal resilience. For an orphan in a tribal society, the positive connotations of the praised one acted as an internalized affirmation.
Oh, because he hears it constantly.
Every single time he was addressed, the very word used to summon him reinforced his inherent value. When your identity is constantly linked to a concept like praise, It creates a psychological floor.
A floor that you can't fall below.
Exactly. It becomes much harder for external circumstances to completely shatter your self-respect when your foundational label is inherently dignified.
It's like it provides a built-in compliment every single time someone addresses you.
Exactly.
But the deep dive goes beyond just how the individual internalizes their own name, right? The notes transition from internal self-esteem to interpersonal expectations. Basically, the name doesn't just change the wearer, it changes how society behaves toward the wearer.
And this brings us to a really critical concept in modern psychology that's highlighted in the text. It's called expectancy theory.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
The sources introduced this landmark research by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson. It was detailed in their famous 1968 book, Pygmalion in the Classroom.
Right.
And they wanted to test how adult expectations actually alter child performance.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This study is absolutely legendary. So they went into an elementary school and evaluated about 650 students with standard intelligence tests.
Just normal baseline testing.
Yeah. Then they approached the teachers and casually handed them a list of specific students, claiming that these specific children had high potential for intellectual growth that year.
Right. They labeled them as academic late bloomers who were just on the verge of excelling.
But the defining detail of this experiment is that the high potential label was a complete fabrication.
Totally made up.
Those students had not scored any higher on the initial test than their peers. The researchers literally pulled the names out of a hat. They were perfectly average students.
Yet the results at the end of the school year were staggering.
What happened?
Those specific students, the randomly selected ones,
Yeah.
actually showed significantly higher achievement and measurable IQ gains compared to the rest of the school.
Measurable IQ gains, just from a fake label.
Yes. The fake label became a real-world reality. Because the teachers believed these kids had high potential, they fundamentally changed how they interacted with them.
Wait, how does an invisible expectation become an actual measurable IQ gain? Like, did the teachers just give them the answers?
No, they didn't consciously decide to favor those students at all. But subconsciously, they altered the micro-interactions. Psychology actually identifies 4 factors at play here.
Okay, what are the 4 factors?
First is climate. Teachers naturally created a warmer socio-emotional environment for these kids. Like, they smiled more, they spoke more softly to them.
Okay, so just generally nicer.
Right. Second is input. They actually taught more material to these students.
Because they assumed they could handle it.
Exactly. Third is response opportunity. They gave these kids more time to answer questions, rather than just rushing them or moving to the next kid.
Oh, that's huge, giving a kid time to think.
Yeah. And the fourth is feedback. When a high-potential student made a mistake, the teacher provided really detailed, constructive feedback. They were operating on the assumption that the child could understand it, rather than just saying wrong and moving on.
So the students absorbed that warmth, that patience, and that detailed feedback, and they stretched themselves to meet the expectation.
It is the ultimate self-fulfilling prophecy.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this connects directly back to Abdulmuttalib's naming choice in 569 CE, right?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, absolutely. When Abdulmuttalib named his grandson Muhammad, he was basically deploying the Pygmalion effect on an entire city.
Wow.
A name like the praised one functions exactly like the high potential label in Rosenthal's classroom. It projects a positive expectation to everyone who says the name out loud.
So when he said, I wanted people on Earth to praise him, he was essentially hacking Meccan society's subconscious behavior.
That's exactly what he was doing.
Every time a Quraysh merchant or a neighbor or even a rival tribe member called out to the boy, they were literally saying, hey, praised one. It forces the speaker to attach a concept of high value to the child.
Which inevitably colors the interaction with a baseline level of respect.
Yeah.
The grandfather engineered an environment of positive expectation through a single word, centuries before modern psychology even gave it a name.
That is just incredible. And for educators and teachers listening, I mean, the takeaway from the sources here is monumental. A student's performance is not solely based on their innate isolated ability.
Not at all.
It is highly dependent on the linguistic and emotional expectations that the adults around them are projecting onto them. Like, if you casually label a kid a troublemaker in the teacher's lounge, you will subconsciously treat them like a threat.
And they will eventually give you the trouble you expect.
Exactly. But if you label them as capable, you offer them the patience required to actually become capable.
Yeah.
The label dictates the environment, and the environment dictates the growth.
It's so true. So we've established how a name affects internal confidence, right? And how it acts as a Pygmalion label to alter external treatment. But the source material pushes the analysis one step further.
It zooms out.
Right, it moves to a macro-societal level. The notes explore how shifting from traditional names to meaningful names actually operates as a mechanism for cultural revolution.
This moves us into, like, the ideological battleground of naming, because the text points out that the name Muhammad didn't merely benefit the prophet personally, it acted as a wedge against the continuation of socially misguided ancestral traditions.
Yes, and the notes provide a really stark example of the type of names that were common at the time, like the name Abd el-Shams.
Which translates directly to servant of the sun.
Right. In that era, Mecca names were heavily tied to polytheistic worship, the reverence of natural elements, and strict, uncompromising tribal allegiance.
Okay, but I have a question about this. How does changing a name actually dismantle a tradition? Like, if someone is named servant of the sun, isn't it just a title? I mean, people today have names derived from ancient gods, like Thursday comes from Thor, but nobody's actually worshiping thunder.
Right, but the difference lies in the active cultural context. In 6th century Mecca, the sun wasn't just a celestial body. It represented an active, deeply ingrained belief system that dictated social hierarchy and power.
It was an active religion.
Exactly. So introducing yourself as servant of the sun reinforced that specific oppressive worldview every single day. What's fascinating here is the mechanism at play. It's cognitive dissonance.
Okay, explain how that dissonance works in practice.
Imagine you're trying to adopt a new egalitarian monotheistic worldview, right?
Yeah.
You were trying to convince your community that all humans are equal and should only serve one unseen creator.
Okay.
But every time you shake someone's hand or introduce yourself in the marketplace, you literally say, "Hello, I am the servant of the sun god."
Oh, I see.
The human brain struggles to hold two conflicting identities simultaneously. True psychological and societal reform requires linguistic consistency. You just cannot build a new societal framework using the vocabulary of the old oppressive regime.
That makes perfect sense. And the notes emphasize that this wasn't just a passive occurrence at the prophet's birth. Throughout his life, he actively encouraged his companions to change their names.
He did. He systematically identified people who carried names with negative meanings, or names tethered to those outdated ancestral power structures, and he guided them to adopt new names.
Names that carried positive, constructive meanings.
It was a deliberate strategy of social engineering. By changing a companion's name, he was severing their psychological tie to a stagnant past. He was forcing the community to stop broadcasting the old traditions and start reinforcing the new, purposeful identity of the group.
He was basically utilizing the Pygmalion effect on a massive scale.
Exactly.
He was replacing the scratchy sweaters with tailored jackets for an entire community.
That's a great way to summarize it.
So what does this all mean? This brings us to the practical application of all this research for you listening, especially for modern parents, or really anyone tasked with naming something significant. The sources offer a highly practical framework that kind of challenges how we approach this today.
Because modern naming culture often falls into two extreme traps.
Right.
On one hand, parents feel immense pressure to find something entirely unique. They heavily focus on aesthetics like how the name looks on a birth announcement or how it sounds in a trendy context.
And on the other hand,
There is the heavy, sometimes suffocating pressure to strictly follow family tradition, passing down a legacy name, even if the parents don't particularly resonate with its meaning or its history.
the historical and psychological data we've unpacked strongly suggests that parents need to look past both of those extremes, past the desire for aesthetics and the obligation to tradition.
Because you are handing a human being their first and most permanent label.
Exactly. The notes ask us to seriously consider the daily psychological reality of that choice.
Parents must ask difficult questions, like, is the name you are considering ripe for mockery? Are you inadvertently handing your child a lifetime of social friction and cognitive load just because a name sounded edgy?
Or conversely, are you saddling them with a family name that carries heavy, perhaps negative historical baggage? You are equipping them for their daily social reality, and that requires real intention. It's about recognizing the embedded expectations, right? Are you setting a baseline of high potential and positive character, or are you just passively passing down a label without examining what it actually projects to the world?
The concept of intention is paramount here. Abdul-Muttalib's intention was absolutely clear, praise. The Pygmalion teacher's intention programmed by the researchers was clear, high potential.
Right.
Whenever we assign labels, whether it is naming our children, titling our creative projects, or even the labels we quietly assign to ourselves in our own internal monologue, we are setting a trajectory. We have to decide if we are actively choosing a positive, constructive path or passively accepting whatever tradition and trend hands us.
I'm so glad you brought up the internal monologue. Our internal monologue is absolutely littered with labels we've accepted without a second thought. I'm the anxious one. I'm bad at math. I'm the procrastinator.
Oh, absolutely.
Those internal labels dictate our self-expectations just as rigidly as the teacher's expectation dictated the student's test scores.
Precisely. You become the label you repeatedly answer to.
Wow. Let's trace the incredible path we've walked today through these sources. We started in the harsh reality of 569 CE Mecca, examining a grandfather's calculated tradition-breaking decision to name his orphaned grandson Mohammed.
He prioritized a psychological shield of praise over the fragile anchor of ancestry.
And from that historical focal point, we explored the mechanics of the human ego. We contrasted the exhausting cognitive load of a negative label against the social security of a positive one.
Then we looked at the empirical data from the 1968 Rosenthal classroom study, proving how the Pygmalion effect turns positive external expectations into tangible, self-fulfilling prophecies.
We analyzed the necessity of cognitive dissonance in driving social change, seeing how replacing names like Servant of the Sun was just a vital mechanism for dismantling oppressive traditions and building a new community identity.
And finally, we extracted the practical mandate for modern parents to prioritize psychological well-being over aesthetics or obligation.
It is a profound synthesis of history, cognitive psychology, and sociology, and it completely recontextualizes something we take for granted every single day.
It really does.
And for you listening, we want to remind you that every time you introduce yourself and every time you speak someone else's name, you aren't just making a sound to get their attention.
No, you're doing much more than that.
You are actively participating in a continuous, deeply psychological exchange of expectations. You are reading the label on the box, and you are shaping the reality of what's inside.
You are an active participant in an ecosystem that either reinforces a person's potential or adds to their daily friction.
So we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We spent this entire deep dive examining how external labels shape us from the outside in. But it raises a profound question about identity.
It does.
If the name we are given carries the invisible, heavy weight of other people's expectations and fundamentally alters how society treats us, how much of your personality is truly yours, and how much is just you unconsciously living up to or rebelling against the very first word you ever learned to respond to.
Now that is a label worth examining very closely.
It sure is. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. We'll see you next time.